Hey everyone, as some of you may know, I have been using the ROG Ally and the XG Mobile 6850 as my only means of computing for the past month or so now. Now this included everything from gaming, social media, video editing, and everything in between. This video will serve as my full official ROG Ally XG Mobile review for the 2022 model. Going into this challenge, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it. Who wouldn't love the idea of having a means to increase your graphical output in a small convenient box? In theory, the XG Mobile is the answer to laptops and handhelds having power constraints. The XG Mobile port is available of course on the ASUS ROG Ally, however it is also available on their Flow lineup of laptops. However, even a newer laptop with an RTX 4050, performance at times can be comparable to the RX 6850, or in some cases, performance on the laptop can be a lot better versus the Ally due to CPU limitations. One thing to note about the XG Mobile port is that it is PCI Gen 3 by 8 on the laptops. However, on the ROG Ally, we are limited to just 4 lanes. Now, for the RTX 3080 16GB and the RX 6850 12GB, this may not prove to be a problem as they are not high-end cards. For reference, the RTX 3080 laptop is the same board as the 3060 desktop. However, with the 4090, you would likely see bandwidth limitations in some applications. Unfortunately, I do not have an RTX 4090 to compare it against, so it is a bit of a bummer, but that's not the point of this video, obviously. To get into it, my main issues with the ROG XG Mobile are the software experience. If you haven't seen my rant video on the XG Mobile just not working, we'll touch on that in this video. However, this video will serve to be an overall experience as well as including fixes and other applications I have used to get a usable experience out of the device. Something I think is absolutely ridiculous to have to do with such an expensive product. Say what you will about Apple's closed-in ecosystem, at least it works more often than not. Seems today that every developer or manufacturer is trying to develop their own bespoke software with eGPUs or even with certain accessories like RGB, as well as any sort of TDP control or hardware control. Usually it's bogged down by some OEM solution. One such solution is called Armoury Crate, or on the ASUS ROG Ally, Armoury Crate SE. Armoury Crate SE serves to offer a more streamlined, mobile-centric focus as opposed to the desktop layout solution with a full-fat Armoury Crate. With the desktop version, the layout is built for bigger displays, and I honestly haven't found any features that weren't available on Armoury Crate SE that were available on the full version, with a few minor things. For instance, you were able to turn off the boot up sound on the ROG X16 within Armoury Crate, but to do this on the ROG Ally, you need to turn it off through the BIOS. On top of that, a criminal oversight in my opinion is that the desktop version of Armoury Crate, you can turn off the red LED on the XG Mobile. However, on the ASUS ROG Ally, the only way you can do this is through software like G-Helper. Now, I do suspect this is eventually going to come to Armoury Crate SE, however, it's just one of those simple things that should have been there from the start. Now, on top of that, you are not able to overclock the XG Mobile at all, at least for the 2022 model. You are able to boost them up to about 300 MHz over stock clocks if you're connecting it onto the ROG X16. Now, interestingly enough, when I connect the RTX 3080 to my ASUS ROG Ally, I actually do have access to the overclock. Honestly, realistically, there's not really going to be that much of a performance difference by only boosting it up like an extra 300, 200 megahertz or so on the core and on the memory. But it is just another feature that is lacking. Again, with the laptop lineups, you can do the adjustments all you want. You have access through MSI Afterburner and you can push it even further. With the 6850 on the ROG Ally, you don't have access to MSI Afterburner or anything like that. Using Armoury Crate with the XG Mobile, at least with the 6850M, has been nothing short of a nightmare. You would think that the way they advertise this thing, it would just be a simple plug-and-play solution. Now, there are more janky solutions for sure. Oculink is just coming to the eGPU scene, and that comes with its own challenges. It's suspected that the XG Mobile port uses a variation of Oculink, and this port will be found on the newest GPD Win devices, as well as some other handhelds coming to the market. However, with the Oculink port, you can put whatever GPU your heart desires into it. You do need to use your own power supply, but at the end of the day, at least the Oculink is upgradable. Now, using the XG Mobile specifically with Armoury Crate SE is a bit of a buggy mess. There are times where it will not display a picture out to my monitor even after several reboots. Uninstalling the display drivers and reinstalling the specific ones, as if you uninstall the incorrect drivers, the Windows automatic ones, you will be limited to 100 watts of power with the 6850M. In my short testing with the 3080, this does not appear to be an issue. However, the 6850M issue was present on their Flow lineup of laptops back in January or so. Just know that any given Armoury Crate update can seriously foobar your device. One day you'll have it working perfectly, then for it to not work the next. I will be playing footage in the background of various issues that I've had. However, what you are supposed to do is plug in the XG Mobile, then push the locking switch down. This will then typically give you a pop-up saying that the XG Mobile has been connected. Click on that new icon found here on the top right, and I found that you need double or triple click this sometimes to get it to register and have this next step work. Once you press the button, it will ask you if you want to stop all processes running on the GPU, and after you hit stop, all you do then is activate it, and if there are no programs running, it will just go straight into the activation after hitting start. After about 5 to 10 seconds or so, the GPU should be connected to the ROG Ally. You would think you're ready to head off to the races, but if you are using the 6850M at this moment, you may be met with constant disconnecting issues or driver issues. You can have the Armoury Crate related bugs happening on all models. However, the GPU drivers for NVIDIA are much more stable, both with the ROG Ally and the X16 Flow. In my early days of using this device, I had thought I was exempt from any issues, as I read that you needed to install a certain driver for it to work, but I mistakenly took this to be the XG Mobile driver meant for their Flow lineup of laptops. This particular driver hasn't been updated on the ASUS site in almost a year now. After installing that driver, I started playing games that I would usually test systems out with. Cyberpunk, Gears 5, Forza Horizon 5, COD Modern Warfare 2. Now, when I was playing Call of Duty, I noticed that I was running at the full 165 watts, and gameplay seemed really smooth at 4K. I had no complaints, until I met my first game crash. I then headed to the ROG Ally Discord, and then after talking with the folks in the XG Mobile thread specifically, I had learned that this was due to me installing the incorrect drivers. Now, the correct drivers to install are what ASUS puts out on their website for the ROG Ally, as well as what gets pushed to you through the updates in My ASUS. Now, after using DDU, or Display Driver Uninstaller, to get rid of my old drivers, I installed the correct ones and headed back into Modern Warfare 2 to test it all out. Now, gameplay did actually seem smoother and performance was better, although I didn't do any recorded benchmarks. After I had installed all this, I thought I was in the clear. And once everything got up and running properly, the first day was actually pretty fantastic. Everything was working as intended, and after doing all of the relevant kind of installs, updates, and restarts, it was pretty good. However, not all is sweet in the land of XG Mobile. As the timeline title suggests, after my first day is when all the issues started to surface. You see, at the time, or even presently, I do not know the suggested or proper way to use this when turning off your device or putting it to sleep. What I did after I was finished using it on the first day, I left the XG Mobile plugged into the Ally and just shut it down from the monitor, from the Ally itself. This obviously turns off the GPU as well, and now when I went to go use the device the next day, I was met with the XG Mobile only outputting to the ROG Ally screen. This in turn cost performance, which is not ideal, and it's not ideal in a desktop environment to have a little 7-inch screen working off of. After restarting the device a couple of times, I did finally output to my monitor. Now, the monitor I'm using, or TV I'm using, is the LG C1 OLED 48-inch. I was using HDMI 2.1 to connect to the LG TV, and this allowed me to output 4K HDR FreeSync premium image, no problems. Whether or not this had anything to do with my issues of it being an HDMI 2.1 TV instead of a monitor, however, being an HDMI 2.1 compliant device, you would expect it to just work. Now, admittedly, at times, Windows does not play nice with the LG TV and my desktop and other computers I've hooked up to it. But anytime I had an issue on my desktop, all I had to do was either restart my computer or unplug the HDMI cable and plug it back in again. This would solve any and all issues I would ever have with it. No amount of restarting can permanently fix the connection issues with the XG Mobile and the Ally though. Another fun issue to run into is the installation of the XG Mobile drivers looping over and over and over again. This plagues all models of XG Mobile, however, for some reason it does seem to be a little bit more exaggerated on the 6850. Now, I have seen reports of this working on the 4090 with no issues, however, I cannot verify this because I don't have access to one, unfortunately. I don't know what fixed my issues on the second day, but I was able to eventually get the image onto the TV, and it did seem to work without issue for the rest of that day. Now, one of the main problems is when Windows automatically installs the AMD Adrenaline drivers. When this happens, there is a bug that will limit you to the aforementioned 100 watts. This will severely limit your GPU's performance. However, it still offers an okay increase to performance, so many people could easily assume that their GPU was working without issue. Even after not allowing updates to perform, in my experience, I have found that they still somehow sneak their way in. Now, I don't know how this is happening. The longest stretch of time I had gotten out of it was about 5 days before the Windows drivers installed. This would in turn lead me to using DDU and then going through the same process of removing the improper drivers and putting on the new ones. If this was my only issue happening with the XG Mobile, it would be okay. I could live with that minor annoyance. Unfortunately, that is not the only issue. Other issues, as previously mentioned, include the display not putting out an image or the installation of the XG drivers looping constantly. As well, if you have the XG Mobile plugged in and power it up, Armoury Crate will have the tendency to just start the deactivation process all on its own. If I was able to reliably connect back to the XG Mobile while using my monitor, this would be a minor bug. Because all you have to do is pile up all the other issues on top of this, and then it turns the repairing process and troubleshooting and everything into a little bit of a song and dance that I really don't want to be a part of. Now, Armoury Crate will also put up an error saying that XG Mobile is not properly connected at times as well, even though it will bypass it and you can just kind of close it and proceed with activating the XG Mobile. Now, I cannot stress enough how much downtime I had with the machine. Typically before starting a video, I would have to allocate about 30 minutes to 1 hour of additional time beforehand just for troubleshooting. On the ultra rare occasion that everything would just work when I went to use it, I was left wondering what kind of trick it had up behind the scenes. Typically though, in these instances, everything just kind of worked. I didn't want to jinx it though, so I didn't ever dare question it, which is apparently a pretty big ask for an $800 GPU. I did have minor issues at times with the HDMI connection. However, these issues were similar to me having on my desktop of like the image just kind of being weird or pixelated or something. Unplugging and replugging the HDMI cable back in seemed to fix it. Again, I think that specifically is a Windows TV connecting shenanigans. It doesn't like to connect to TV resolutions all the time, so there can be weirdness with it. Well, what do you get out of the 6850 when everything works? Well, pretty damn good performance. I did touch on this briefly in my past video, however this time I will show some repeatable benchmarks in the background. Resolutions used were 1080p on the ROG Ally, then testing 1080p through 4K with the 6850M. I did go back and do 1440p and 4K tests on the Ally, and honestly some of the results may surprise you. The ROG Ally can do 1440p in certain titles quite well. As well, you can do some small titles at 4K, but honestly, the Ally on its own should be limited to just 1080p and below, in my opinion. Especially with the VRAM memory that it's outfitted with, only having up to 8 gigabytes. But I mean, really, the sweet spot is kind of 4 to 6. So the clock speeds for the XG Mobile are 2.4 gigahertz for the core and 18,000 megahertz on the memory. Now, it's outfitted with a 192-bit bus, and the specs on it are pretty respectable, especially compared to the ROG Ally. The Ally can have a maximum amount of virtual RAM set to 8 gigabytes, and the 6850 has 12 gigabytes of dedicated GDDR6 RAM. Now, this will allow you to crank up the texture quality and resolutions. For a point of reference, I was able to run Resident Evil 4 set to ray tracing mode on my 4K screen using FSR set to performance, which is quite impressive for an AMD laptop GPU, especially due to the RT, even though it is a light RT title. Now, when it all works, it is a great experience. I did find the CPU pairing with the GPU was a little limiting at times. This was more evident when playing a recent release title such as Remnant 2. When playing on the XG Mobile connected to the Ally, I was getting performance around 30 to 40 FPS in most scenes. Now, interior levels did prove more stable. However, even with everything set to low, an FSR set to balanced, as going below balanced didn't really do anything for performance, it just looked worse. Now, I tried running the game at 4K and 1440p. Performance was slightly better at 1440p, but not by much. The interesting part is when comparing it to the X16 with an RTX 4050 and a 13900H. Performance at 1440p with DLSS 2 set to balanced, medium settings, I was able to get 60 plus FPS in most scenes. Some scenes did prove a little bit heavier at times, but after enabling frame gen, something that AMD does not offer at this point at all, I was getting 80 plus FPS. I was kind of surprised at how much better the experience was on the X16, especially because it only has 6 GB of RAM. Now, this is simply due to the CPU limitation on the Ally, as well as the low TDP limit compared to the X16. These new games coming out in Unreal Engine 5 are CPU hungry. As such, I would take the time to remind people that with newer games coming out, having CPU boost off on the Ally is not the ideal way to go. Game engines are utilizing CPUs like never before. Using this will hurt your performance in certain titles. If you are the type of person to change something and forget about it, I suggest you leave CPU boost on. Now, connecting the XG Mobile to the X16 will offer better performance due to the higher PCIe lanes, as well as having better CPU paired with it. Now, that's not to say you'll be losing a lot of performance in-game, but like I said, with certain titles such as Remnant, you are CPU limited on the Ally. Another game would be Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales. I will make a separate video detailing this in much further depth, doing individual game tests. Now, I would have no problem recommending this GPU to anyone with an Ally wanting more performance on a TV or desktop docked setup. This is only the real kind of realistic choice for a lot of people, as it's the most affordable option, while also being the most buggy option at the same time. Now, keep in mind, you will need to monitor your performance, unfortunately, because as was the case with Forza Horizon 5, when I was testing it, I was continuing on with my benchmarking, but in the time it took me to switch from Cyberpunk to Forza Horizon 5, the 100-watt bug just kind of reared its ugly head. Now, I don't have enough time, nor would I expect anyone else here to sit here and uninstall drivers and reinstall them. And even though the Windows install drivers are blocked, they still find their way in. It literally happened between my 1440p tests for Cyberpunk. As such, I cannot give a full performance benchmark scenario at this time. I will in the future compare performance in specific titles with the 3080, so look out for that video. Now, finally getting to the entire point of this challenge, and perhaps the most useful to know, is the Ally usable as a laptop or desktop replacement in conjunction with an XG Mobile? In short, yes, it can be at times. However, I've probably done more with this Ally than a lot of people have done with theirs in my almost 2 months now of having it. Using this as my only means of computing was a challenge. Anytime I went to go use my Chromebook or desktop to do something, whether it be play a game or send a simple email, I would have to remind myself to use the Ally. It was only unnatural to me because I have options on what to use. This obviously wouldn't be an issue if someone were to use the Ally exclusively. Now, after using just the Ally on my own for a week, I'd gotten used to the idea and rewired my brain a bit to reach for the Ally when doing simple computing. Now, I was able to use the Ally as a laptop, sort of, but I do have a Bluetooth media controller remote center that I can connect to the Ally. Now, I mainly use this when connected to a TV and playing on the couch, as using Bluetooth or even wired controller with the Ally will not allow you to control the desktop at all with it. If there was a way to have a desktop mode and gamepad mode work similar with wireless controllers, that would be a fantastic option. But I know you can use ReWASD or similar programs, but I would much prefer a native solution. I did find myself not using the Ally as much in a laptop configurations to do things like sending emails, as I would just use my phone to fire off a quick email reply. Now, however, when I was typing out a more formal or long-winded email, I would typically type it out on the Ally when connected to the XG Mobile. This is no laptop device, do not kid yourself. You will need accessories to make this suitable, and even then, like, it's just not that good. Like, you need a larger screen, you need a keyboard and mouse. Adding all these things up, it can easily come to the cost of or exceed the cost of a decent laptop when you throw in the 6850 or the 3080 especially. But if you're only able to afford one device and kind of like the accessories around that, I mean, I can see there being a scenario for it, and using the Ally only for like computing, it could work. Think dorm room setup. I can see a scenario in which you need a computer just for note-taking during class. With that, you could bring a smaller sized external screen along with a slim USB-C dock. There are mini-sized keyboards and mice as well. It could be a nice portable package for a student that would much rather be gaming than studying in their spare time. Now, not having been in school for a while, I can assume that there are plugs at desks these days. However, you could bring a small battery bank just in case. And that's where my reality ends for what I can see the Ally being used for, at least in a laptop or desktop kind of scenario. Keep in mind, since I made the initial video announcement of me acquiring the 6850, I have recorded, edited, and done everything to do with these videos, all on the ASUS ROG Ally. Now, during this time, I discovered that yes, only having 16 gigabytes of RAM sucks for video editing, photo editing, and higher resolution gaming. Now, especially since I was working with 4K footage, it made it an absolute nightmare. When I started adding the layers and effects, it got so bad that when I was using just DaVinci Resolve and then trying to open up OBS, the system would run out of dedicated memory, dip into the virtual severely, and then this would be when things come to an absolute crawl. Now, if anything other than DaVinci was open, the system wouldn't crash, but it was not happy. I could press every single button on the keyboard and nothing would happen. It would sometimes lock up for a minute or two, and I would have to then close the offending tab and move back over to DaVinci. When working on smaller videos though, with not a lot of recorded 4K footage, editing did work quite well on it. I had no complaints other than the speed at which certain tasks would execute. Now, again, when using the XG Mobile on the Ally, you must set the UMA buffer to auto. This way you are accessing all 16 gigabytes of RAM as system memory. This can often lead to worse performance in handheld mode though, so just keep this in mind if you are switching from dock to handheld mode often. 16 gigabytes is quickly becoming obsolete, and I feel as though it was just yesterday doing the upgrade from 8 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes or making the switch from single channel to dual channel. But at higher resolutions, 32 gigabytes of RAM is quickly becoming the standard, especially when you start incorporating things like ray tracing. This may not have been an issue for the 6850, but however, keep that in mind if you intend to use the 3080 or the 4090 with RT on the Ally. It will eat up your CPU and RAM. But honestly, by the end of editing a video, I was so worn out from all the troubleshooting and the issues that I just lacked any desire to use the device any further. So as such, I would leave it docked to the XG Mobile most of the time, and I would find myself just not using the Ally handheld much at all. Compared to the first month of having the Ally, I couldn't put it down. I was just so irritated by the end of the day after editing a video that I just would not want to bother using it at all. If my Steam Deck was working, I would likely find myself wanting to reach for that, I'm sure. This is the exact opposite experience I thought I would have. I naively thought that I could be doing my work or heavier AAA games on the XG Mobile, and then undocking and chilling with my wife playing games on our handhelds together. However, I just did not want to see any more because I was just so sick of it in 2 weeks. There are solutions to these problems. If you are stuck with the GPU looping, you can end the GPU switch program and task manager. This will stop the looping from happening. However, if you want to avoid this entirely, you can delete the GPU switch folder in the Armoury Crate main folder. Then use a program like ghelper or x86 handheld tuner to activate the XG Mobile. I had found though Armoury Crate can still rear its ugly head and create issues with these installed. There are some reports of having no issues after using the ghelper option and deleting the GPU switch folder. One issue I was never able to fix was the random issues of installing the bad drivers. Now, turning my 165 watt GPU into a lesser version of itself. Even after uninstalling all of Armoury Crate and using only x86 tuner and G-Helper, I was able to get the XG Mobile to work more reliably. Connection issues weren't as present, however the bad drivers would still install themselves and limit my power. Again, a minor issue of needing to reinstall the drivers, but annoying occurrence nonetheless. I could go on with further fixes and tweaks, but quite honestly, I shouldn't have to. These community solutions and tricks should not become the norm. Companies should ensure that they are putting out proper, compatible drivers. With this being a pretty widespread issue, at least with the 100 watt bug, it's hard to imagine how this got out of any sort of quality control process. Now, what's even worse is it's been broken since the July 5th. You can find a State of the Ally report on the unofficial ROG Ally Discord and Reddit thread. I do suggest you to go join these groups. I'm also in this Discord channel as well. I'm not like affiliated with it or anything, but if you wanted to reach out to me, you can reach out to me in there. If you are having any problems unlisted in this video, please comment your issues and I will pin them as a comment in this video. Some people experience some or all of the issues, and then there are the lucky few that have no problems at all. In conclusion, using the XG Mobile should have been a fantastic experience. If everything worked as advertised, I would have no problems recommending any of the XG Mobiles to anyone, as long as they spend within their price budget. However, we don't live in a fairy tale land where this works all the time. I wish I kept track of how much time I spent troubleshooting. However, I can say that my gaming habits have severely dropped. At least in terms of playing in a desktop environment, I spent more time trying to fix this thing than I did trying to play with it. Now, I'm confident in time these issues will be fixed. However, given how niche of a product it is, I would not hold my breath for that to happen anytime soon. Always buy the product on how it is today, not how it is promised to be. As soon as these issues are fixed, you can be sure to know that I'll be making a video praising this thing if it works as intended. Now at this point, I cannot recommend the 6850 to anyone just because of all the bugs. Whether you're planning to use it on a Nintendo Switch style kind of Pro dock, or if you use it as a full desktop replacement, kind of how I've been, you'll likely have a bad time with this. Now that's not to say the 3080 and the 4090 are better, but they still have these Armoury Crate bugs. However, their drivers actually do work. So to wrap up this challenge, I would like to see these issues highlighted here fixed. For it to be a better experience. The XG Mobile could be an amazing experience if everything worked correctly. However, I just cannot recommend this as an all-in-one solution to anyone, especially if the ROG Ally is your only device. These XG Mobiles start to make more sense when you are more involved in the ecosystem, such as having the ROG Flow laptop. If you are an ROG Ally owner and still want an XG Mobile, I would still suggest purchasing the 6850, even though I said not to, but when everything is fixed, as this is the most affordable option and the one that makes the most sense. To spend $1,500 on the 3080 or $2,000 on the RTX 4090 just does not make sense when you can get much better performance out of a desktop or a laptop solution. In the case of the 4090, I would only ever buy it if you also have an ROG Flow. Not to mention, to find either the 3080 or 4090 at MSRP in stock is a bit of a feat itself, especially if you live anywhere except America. Canada has one retailer for the 4090, being Memory Express. Their process is for you to place an online order for one, and then they go about sourcing it. However, from what I've read online, this is not the case, and they will likely just cancel your order. On top of that, there are no returns or exchanges. I'm not sure what the process is like in other parts of the world, however, I can assume it's not that much better. The only ones that seem to come up are on eBay, and people are just out to lunch on posting them for $3,000 to $4,000. Or there's units in Japan for the same price. The scarcity of these things are driving up their already insane price to even greater heights, all for a 150 watt GPU. Now, should you use the ROG Ally as your only means of computing? No. Unless you are in a very specific situation where you could benefit from having a proper desktop from time to time, but not enough to justify the additional cost of another computer. You could find some cheaper accessories such as the mouse, USB-C dock, keyboard, and once in a blue moon a portable monitor. It is doable, made even easier with the XG Mobile dock. When it works, it works. However, for serious computing like video editing or similar, the low amount of system RAM will be felt here. At the end of this challenge, having reflected on all the successes and failures of the XG Mobile, I cannot wholeheartedly recommend this experience or setup to anyone, only due to the fact that you are beholden to a lot of things working correctly. If you have a limited amount of time to work or play, having a reliable setup is a must, something the XG Mobile cannot claim. If you've been using the XG Mobile with your ROG Ally or any other ROG Flow product, I would love to know how your experience has been with it going so far. Now, have you been having any of the problems listed here, or have you been using it as a desktop replacement? Please let me know in the comments. As always, I want to thank my channel members Darkstar, Amoa, Rico1217, Joey VR, and Roy Watney, but I believe that's a typo to Roy Wayne. You guys are truly amazing. I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to become channel members. As well, any and all funds received from AdSense or anything else will be put directly back into the channel. So a big shout out to everyone, especially you who's watching right now. Whoever you are, thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. As always, I hope you all have a great day.